Welcome to another of our ongoing discussions on the Book of Mormon. I'm joined today by friends and colleagues from the Department of Ancient Scripture at Brigham Young University. To my immediate left is Eric Huntsman. To his left is Victor Ludlow. And finally, Stan Johnson. Welcome, and I'm glad that you're here, brethren. Today's discussion will be on 2 Nephi, chapters 4 and 5. These chapters form a transition from the days of Lehi to the days of Nephi. It includes Lehi's last blessing to his people, and it includes the beginning of the struggles between the Nephites and Lamanites. Let's begin by looking at chapter 4, the first couple of verses. For instance, in verse 2, Lehi is going to mention Joseph's prophecies that have been quoted earlier in the Book of Mormon, particularly about his posterity. And it's going to be leading in then to the discussion of his blessing for his own children. Wherefore, in verse 3, wherefore after my father hath made an speaking concerning the posterity of Joseph, he called in Laman and begins to give him his blessing.
Well, yeah, particularly the children of Laman. It's interesting, it doesn't mention Laban as being there. I don't know if he was there or not, but it's the children that he's talking to here. I guess he figures he's tried to give Laman plenty of opportunities earlier, but there's his grandchildren that he's wanting to reach out to.
Very good. Yes. And what's he going to say to these grandchildren?
Well, his biggest concern is that because the children of Laman and then subsequently Lemuel and the children of Ishmael's sons are not being brought up in the correct way, he knows that they will not have a good chance of following the commandments of the Lord. He lays out in verse 4 this famous Book of Mormon covenant. I often call it the Lehi covenant. It's the application of the Deuteronomic covenant to the people of Lehi, that inasmuch as ye shall keep my commandments, ye shall prosper in the land. Inasmuch as ye will not keep my commandments, ye shall be cut off from my presence. And he's concerned about his grandchildren, knowing that they won't be brought up in the way of the Lord, and so they won't have the benefits of the blessings of this promise. And so he makes a rather astounding promise to them. In verse 6, he says, if ye are cursed, behold, I leave my blessing upon you, that the cursing may be taken away from you and be answered upon the heads of your parents. He had previously said that if you had been brought up in the way of the Lord, I know you wouldn't depart from it. And that's always been a great comfort to me. I mean, we know in today's society that many people grow up in less than desirable circumstances. They grow up in abusive situations. They grow up without the benefit of good moral teaching or religious practice. And sometimes it seems like the deck is stacked against them. They fall into abusive patterns themselves, addictive behavior, delinquent behavior, etc. And it's nice to know that Father Lehi was concerned about his children, and our Father in heaven is concerned about his children, and that he will be the one who judges how responsible we are for our behavior.
Mm-hmm. Is there a lesson there at the end of verse 6 about the cursing being taken from them and answered upon the heads of your parents?
It does remind me of section 68, where again the sin be upon the heads of the parents if they are neglectful in their responsibilities. I think we try our best. I think that's what the Lord wants from us. We try our best. Verse 5, I know that if you're brought up in the way you should go, you will not depart from it. Think about that. If you really would have had a fair chance, you'd have been okay. But obviously you didn't. And I think it says something about life. It really isn't fair.
Well, and there's two sides of the coin. We had a home teacher for a number of years that worked on doing various types of studies for the church, and one of them was successive generation activity rates. And they found that if a family has been active in committing the gospel for at least a generation and a half into the second generation, that thereafter about 85% on an average of their posterity will remain active. But there's that 15% that fall away, and once they're inactive and out of the church for at least a generation and a half, then thereafter the great majority of their descendants, even though they may live among Latter-day Saints and still recognize their LDS heritage, they just don't come.
That's what's beautiful about the blessing of Lehi, though, because in the subsequent narrative, we see very quickly that Laman and his followers are cut off from the presence of the Lord. But it's within only a matter of a few generations that we see Lamanites in the book of Alma and subsequently repeatedly answering the call as missionaries go out to them. And we end up seeing more Lamanites being responsive to the Lord and having the results of that curse taken from them than we see Nephites being faithful to the covenant.
Besides giving this blessing to Laman's sons, and again in verse 9, Laban's children, we have him also giving a blessing to Ishmael and his household. And then in verse 11, we have the mention of Sam. Now, Sam doesn't play a huge part in the Book of Mormon, but he's mentioned here again.
This is a wonderful passage. It says in verse 11, He spake unto Sam, saying, Blessed art thou and thy seed. And then skipping to the end of the verse, Thou shalt be even like unto thy brother, and thy seed like unto his seed, and thou shalt be blessed in all thy days. Sam, I think, is a wonderful example for us as members of the church. I mean, we all want to be like Nephi, but the reality is very few of us are of that prophetic stature. This reminds me of a passage early on in the Book of Mormon in 1 Nephi 2, when Nephi has gone out and gained the strong prophetic testimony of his father's mission and of the Lord, and he comes back. And in 1 Nephi 2:17, the narrative simply says that he talked to Sam, and Sam believed on his words. And it reminds me of the gifts of the Spirit that are outlined in section 46 of the Doctrine and Covenants. To some is given to know by the Spirit that Jesus is the Son of God. But then in verse, I think it's 14, it says, and to others is given to believe on their words. And so for many of us who are Sams, it's nice to know that our spiritual gift of being able to believe in the testimony of others as we gain our own is recognized by the Lord, and that if we're faithful to that, like Sam here in chapter 4 of 2 Nephi, we can be blessed with others who have strong testimonies.
President Thacker calls it the rank and file of the church, and I like that.
Most of us are Sams, aren't we?
We're the rank and file of the church, but what a blessing, really.
And we get all the blessings of that obedience, yes. Well, in verse 12, Father Lehi dies. And this has got to be a transition point between the stuff that's gone on before and the stuff that comes afterwards.
It's such a stark passage. If we had the large plates, perhaps there'd be more details about his final illness or his decline and the ceremonies that attended his burial. But all we have here is he waxed old, and it came to pass that he died and was buried. And from the earliest times when I was reading the Book of Mormon, I was always struck by that, even as a young man. You know, here's Lehi, who's such a prominent figure throughout the Book of Mormon. He's the prophet. Nephi's constantly deferring to his father, even when Lehi's kind of off the track. And suddenly he's gone. Yes. And it's been a real object lesson to me of the transitory nature of our mortal probation. You know, even those who are great and faithful, they wax old, they die, and they're buried. And it's left for those who come after to carry on.